Welcome to Rathalos Watch. This is the 7th episode of Shoot X Monster Return to Hunter Wilds. In this episode, I will be discussing Gigginox, a monster that likes to dwell in icy caverns and stalk its prey by detecting their body heat. Gigginox is classified as a flying wyvern and was originally introduced in Monster Hunter 3 when it was released on August 1st, 2009 in Japan, and on April 20th, 2010 in the USA, followed by April 23rd for Europe and April 29th for Australia. One quick thing to note is that Gigginox only appeared in the 3rd generation of Monster Hunter and has never made a return in any of the generations after that, with the exception of a spin-off title, Monster Hunter Explore. Otherwise, this disturbing creepy wyvern has been on a hiatus ever since Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, which was released all the way back on December 10th, 2011. Gigginox is a creature similar to the Kezu, but it uses poison instead of lightning. Both are blind and prefer to dwell alone in dark caves. Gigginox can sense the body heat of its prey, while Kezu relies heavily on its excellent sense of smell. Both Kezu and Gigginox are weakest to the fire element. By the way, if you haven't seen the Kezu video yet, make sure to watch it. You can click on the card on the top right to go to it. Gigginox can range in a size from the smallest gold crown at 982.8 centimeters to the largest gold crown size at 1266.7 centimeters. Hunters can encounter Gigginox for the very first time in a 4-star village quest called The Creeping Venom that takes place in the tundra biome. It's also worth noting that Gigginox is not an inhabitant of any other biomes. Fun fact: Gigginox can reproduce asexually and can do so whenever it desires. The official in-game description states that they are extremely fertile and capable of laying an innumerable amount of eggs. Now that we discussed some history of Gigginox, let's dive in and talk about why he is memorable to a lot of the hunters who originally started back in Monster Hunter 3. First, we will break down the visual design, then combat, and of course the subspecies. Gigginox visual design is just as disturbing as, if not more, than Kezu's. Gigginox is wide and flat, whereas Kezu is bulkier with large fat reserves. Unlike Kezu, Gigginox doesn't have visible veins and is much quicker and more agile, allowing it to flip around the cave with ease. However, to propel itself up to the ceiling, Gigginox must use all 4 limbs along with its tail. In contrast, Kezu can simply use its hind legs to leap around and cling to cave ceilings. Gigginox's neck is just as elastic as Kezu's. The top of its skin is a mix of gray, while the underside is dark red. When Gigginox becomes enraged, its skin darkens to a nearly black hue. It has white markings on its tail, chest, and head, and the eye-like sections glow purple in dark areas. It's worth noting that these markings can be broken by hunters. Gigginox's face is circular, with a leech-like maw filled with sharp teeth. Gigginox's combat is quite unique from a lot of other monsters in the universe of Monster Hunter, and I think that's kind of what makes him a rather interesting creature. First of all, I find his fighting much more engaging than, say, that of the Kezu, who just normally stands in one place and pulses electricity all day and spews out lightning. Gigginox can lay 2 types of eggs during combat. One type explodes, dealing damage and poisoning you if you're hit, so be sure to bring plenty of antidotes before fighting it. The other type of egg spawns Giggis, which are essentially baby Gigginoxes that wiggle around, jump at you, and suck on your blood if they manage to latch onto you. You can shake them off by rolling multiple times. Whenever Gigginox lays a spawning egg, your top priority should always be to destroy the egg before you become overwhelmed by a swarm of leeches. Occasionally, Gigginox will cling to a ceiling or a cave wall. Be very cautious when this happens because it will stretch its elastic neck to try and grab you, drag you in, and literally consume you. The hunter will then be forced to either escape by rapidly tapping buttons or rely on fellow hunters to help if you're in multiplayer, or if you're solo, your best defense is to use a dunk bomb to get released instantly. From time to time, he will also spit out poisonous cloud in front of him, and if you stand in it, you will get poisoned. On top of that, if you are hanging around too close to Gigginox, he will also let out a big poisonous cloud right underneath him. This is telegraphed ahead of time, so be ready to dodge out of the way. If the hunter manages to inflict enough damage to Gigginox, then he will eventually flip over on its back. His underbelly is the most vulnerable weak spot, so make sure your weapon is fully sharpened and go all out on hitting him as fast as you can. Perhaps his most annoying attack is where he stretches out his elastic neck and tries to swipe you with his head back to back. Even if you are to the side of him, his face can still hit you. The distance on this attack is quite long. You want to be either completely behind him or on the proper opposite side to avoid his head swings. Attempting to hit the tail will also cause your weapon to bounce back. On occasion, he will also jump and flip over your head to get behind you, or to simply switch sides and confuse you. This can get quite old as you are constantly forced to move and adjust yourself to avoid his attack while also trying to align yourself to get a few hits in. Other times, he will slam down half of his entire body on the floor trying to hit you. This does a lot of damage but is easily avoidable by dodging away, and the hitbox is quite forgiving. When Gigginox becomes enraged, its head hardens while its tail softens. So to cause a break and deal damage, you must now target the tail instead of the head. I think this mechanic makes the fight more engaging, as I am not aware of any other monsters that switch their weak spots when they become enraged. Some do change their elemental weaknesses though. For example, Akantor is normally weak to dragon, but when enraged, it becomes more vulnerable to thunder. With Gigginox, however, you actually have to focus on a different part of the body during its enraged state. Last but not least, Gigginox does indeed have a subspecies that you fight later in the game as you progress through both village and guild ranks. This subspecies goes by the name of Baleful Gigginox. This variant has way more health and is only accessible in high rank of the village and G rank in the guild tavern. He is more of a dark yellowish color mixed with a little bit of brown, and he is all about electrifying you rather than poisoning. Baleful Gigginox does not lay the same type of eggs as his regular counterpart. Instead, he will lay a bright yellow egg that later explodes into a shock. If you are standing near it, you will get electrocuted, stunned, and take a lot of damage. Avoid these thunderous eggs at all costs and roll out of the way as soon as possible. Speaking of thunder, he will also light himself up from time to time if you are too close to him for a long period of time. This will also stun and damage you for quite a bit, electrify you, and put you to the ground for a few seconds, leaving you exposed. On top of that, he can also spit out lightning balls from his mouth that will then split into 3 additional shockwaves in front of him. This ability is kind of similar to what the Kazu does, so just stand to his side and hit him in the face for some free easy damage. The double head swipe attack also carries over to Baleful Gigginox, so you still need to be cautious. And yes, he will also slam down on the ground with his belly, face, and wings, just like the regular Gigginox. That is Gigginox and his subspecies Baleful Gigginox in a nutshell. Like always, we have to ask ourselves if Gigginox is worthy of a return to Monster Hunter Wilds. As much as I despite Kazu, I really adore Gigginox, and for the simple fact that his fight is just a lot more engaging and has more strategy to it. He is also more unique looking. Still disturbing and ugly, of course, but that's part of the charm, right? I really think Gigginox isn't getting enough love by the developers. He was only in a single generation, just like how Kurapeko was, and both were introduced in Monster Hunter 3. Similarly to the Kazu, Gigginox would only reside in a dark, cavernous environment, cold biomes, and possibly a swamp region, which we have yet to see in Monster Hunter Wilds. I'm not sure if Capcom would consider including both Kazu and Gigginox, or only one of them. However, if it was up to me and we only had one slot left for the finalized monster roster, and it was between a Kazu or Gigginox, then I would 100% choose Gigginox. He's more fun to fight, looks cooler, and is just overall much more unique. Also, him being able to lay eggs would provide for an interesting dynamic living ecosystem interaction. What if the Giggis would spawn and then jump on other monsters to suck their blood? Or some other cave-dwelling monsters that would try to destroy their eggs to keep themselves safe? Gigginox has far more interesting potential with how it would interact with its surroundings and other living creatures, if you ask me. Now imagine if Capcom decided to include both the Kazu and Gigginox. How would they interact with each other? Would they have turf wars and fight for territory so one of them could have the cave to themselves? Gigginox obviously would want his own little private corner so he can lay eggs in peace. Meanwhile, Kazu would want a place to hide, to stalk its prey when it comes in and consume it. Best case scenario, in my opinion, would be to include both of these monsters for the reasons stated above. But if I only had one choice, then it would be Gigginox. If you are curious about my thoughts on Kazu returning to Monster Hunter Wilds, then click on the card on the top right to be taken to the video. One last thing I wanted to mention is the crazy looking Plague Doctor set from the hammer weapon showcase video. It seems that Capcom is back to doing some crazy unique designs for both armor and weapons, which in my opinion is quite awesome. If you look carefully at this picture here, you can clearly see 2 orange eyes and a pinkish tongue sticking out on the neckline. The purple is signifying that this set is coming from a poisonous monster. Now I am not saying this new set belongs to Gigginox particularly, but the point here is that Capcom hasn't forgotten about creating twisted monster designs. Clearly this armor and weapon belongs to either some cave-dwelling creature that likes to lick you and poison you, or is some sort of a poisonous bird because of the Plague Doctor's beak on the hammer. The female armor looks like a surgeon, the male armor is that of a Plague Doctor. Poison is 100% involved. I'm going to have to say it's a new monster. The hammer also has an exposed brain inside of it, which implies that this monster is kind of horror themed, and both Kazu and Gigginox carry strong horror vibes. The point is that this new monster might be the one replacing Kazu or Gigginox, or for all we know, it could be a redesign of Gigginox or some sort of a spiritual successor. At this point, I'm just sounding like I'm trying to cope, so I'm going to let it go. Well, let me know what you fellow hunters think about this, and if you want Gigginox to return or not, and why. What do you think about the hammer armor and weapon set? Do you believe it belongs to any monster, and what kind of a creature is it? I hope you enjoyed the 7th episode of Gigginox Monster Return to Monster Hunter Wilds. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit like and subscribe with the notifications turned on. Peace out and happy hunting.